Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dave, and it's a delight and a privilege to be speaking with you today. And I thought I would start with testicles. Men who routinely sleep just 4 to 5 hours a night have significantly smaller testicles than those who sleep 7 hours or more. In addition, men who routinely sleep, again, just 4 to 5 hours a night, will have a level of testosterone which is that of someone 10 years their senior. So in other words, a lack of sleep can age a man by almost a decade in terms of that critical aspect of wellness and virility. And I should note, by the way, that we see equivalent impairments in female reproductive health caused by a lack of sleep. This is perhaps the best news that I have for you today. From this point forward, it may only get a little bit more challenging. Not only am I going to tell you about the wonderfully good things that happen when you get sleep, but some of the alarmingly bad things that happen when you don't get enough, both for your brain and also for your body. Let me start with the brain and the functions of learning and memory. Because what we've discovered over the past 10 or so years is that you need sleep after learning to essentially hit the save button on those new memories so that you don't forget. So in other words, sleep will actually future-proof that information within your brain. But recently we discovered that you not only need sleep after learning, but you also need sleep before learning. And now to actually prepare your brain, almost like a dry sponge, ready to initially soak up new information. And without sleep, the memory circuits within the brain essentially become waterlogged, as it were, and you can't absorb new information. Let me show you the data. So here in this study, we decided to test the hypothesis that pulling the all-nighter was a good idea. How do you do that? Well, we took a group of perfectly healthy individuals and we assigned them to one of two experimental groups, a sleep group and then a sleep deprivation group. Now, the sleep group, they get a full 8 hours of slumber. But the deprivation group, we're going to keep them awake in the laboratory under full supervision. There's no naps, no caffeine, miserable for everyone involved. And then the next day, we're going to place those participants one at a time inside an MRI scanner. And we're going to have them try and learn a whole list of new facts as we're taking snapshots of brain activity. And then we're going to test them to see how effective that learning has been. And that's what you're looking at here on the vertical axis, so the efficiency of learning. The higher up you are, the more that you learn. And when you put those two groups head to head, what you see is a quite significant 40% deficit in the ability of the brain to make new memories without sleep. I think this should be frightening considering what we know is happening to sleep in our education populations, for example. Just to put that in context, it would be the difference between acing an exam and failing it miserably, 40%. And we've gone on to discover what actually goes wrong within your brain to produce these types of learning disabilities. And there's a structure that sits very deep in your brain on the left and the right side of the brain called the hippocampus. And you can see it here in these sort of orange-yellow colors. Think of the hippocampus almost like the informational inbox of your brain. It's very good at receiving new memory files and then holding on to them. And when we looked at this structure in those people who'd had a full night of sleep here in green, what we saw was lots of healthy learning-related activity. Yet in those people who were sleep deprived here in red, we actually couldn't find any significant signal whatsoever. So it's almost as though sleep deprivation had shut down your memory inbox, and any new incoming files, they were just being bounced. You couldn't effectively commit new experiences to memory. And parenthetically, if you'd like to know what life is like without a functioning hippocampus, just watch the movie Memento. I suspect many of you have seen this movie. If you haven't, it's a great film and I won't spoil the punchline, but this gentleman suffers brain damage. And from that point forward, he can no longer make any new memories. He's what we call densely amnesic. The part of his brain that was damaged was the hippocampus. And it is the very same structure that sleep deprivation will attack and block your brain's capacity for new learning. So that's the bad that happens when I take sleep away from you. But let me just come back to that control group for a second here in green. Remember those folks that got a full 8 hours of sleep? Well, we can ask a very different question here. What is it about the physiological quality of your sleep when you do get it that actually restores and enhances your learning and memory ability each and every day? And by placing electrodes all over the head, what we've discovered is that there are big, powerful brainwaves that happen during the very deepest stages of sleep that have riding on top of them these spectacular bursts of electrical activity that we call sleep spindles. And it's the combined quality of these deep sleep brainwaves that acts like a file transfer mechanism at night, shifting memories from a short-term vulnerable reservoir over to a more permanent long-term storage site within the brain, therefore protecting them and making them safe. And it's important, by the way, that we understand what it is during sleep that actually transacts these memory benefits. And what we've discovered, again, from these big, powerful brainwaves, is that with this file transfer mechanism at night, there are real implications here specifically for medicine. And one area that we've moved this work out into is the context of aging and dementia. Why is that? Well, one of the, of course, cognitive classic hallmarks of aging is that as we get older, our learning and memory abilities begin to fade and decline. But one of the other physiological signatures of aging is that your sleep gets worse. And not just any type of sleep, particularly that deep quality of sleep that I was just discussing. And only last year we finally published evidence that these two things, they're not simply co-occurring, they are significantly interrelated. And it suggests that the disruption of deep sleep is perhaps an underappreciated factor that is contributing to what we call cognitive decline or memory decline in aging, and most recently we've discovered in Alzheimer's disease as well. Now, I know this is perhaps a little bit of depressing news. It's in the mail, it's coming at us all, but there's a possible silver lining here. Unlike many of the other factors that we know are associated with aging, for example, changes in the physical structure of the brain, or even changes in the blood flow dynamics of the brain, they are fiendishly difficult to treat, and medicine has no good approaches. But that sleep is a missing piece in the explanatory puzzle of aging and Alzheimer's is exciting because we may be able to do something about it. And one way that we are approaching this at my sleep center is not by using sleeping pills, by the way. Unfortunately, they are blunt instruments that do not produce naturalistic sleep, and they have been associated with a significantly higher risk of death as well as cancer. And they're not the first-line recommended treatment for insomnia right now. Instead, we're actually developing a method based on this. It's called direct current brain stimulation. It sounds like the stuff of science fiction, but it's actually science fact. You apply some electrode pads to the head, and you insert a small amount of voltage. So small you typically don't feel it, but it has a measurable impact. Now, if you apply this stimulation during sleep in young, healthy adults, as if you're sort of singing in time with those deep sleep brainwaves, not only can you amplify the size of those deep sleep brainwaves, but in doing so, you can almost double the amount of memory benefit that you get from sleep. So the question now is, can we translate the same affordable, potentially portable piece of technology into older adults and those with dementia? Can we restore back some healthy quality of deep sleep? And in doing so, can we salvage aspects of their learning and memory function? That is my real hope now. That's one of our sort of moonshot goals, as it were. So that's sleep for learning, memory, aging, Alzheimer's disease. That's sleep as an example for your brain. But of course, sleep is just as essential for your body. And here I could have chosen any one of the model systems in your body and gone into detail. We've already spoken about sleep loss and your reproductive system. Or I could tell you about sleep loss and your metabolic system. That after 1 week of short sleep, your blood sugar levels are disrupted so significantly that your doctor would classify you as being pre-diabetic. Or I could tell you about sleep loss and your cardiovascular system, and that all it takes is 1 hour. Because there is a global experiment performed on 1.6 billion people across 70 countries twice a year. And it's called daylight savings time. Now, in the spring, when we lose 1 hour of sleep, we see a subsequent 24% increase in heart attack risk the following day. Yet in the autumn, in the fall, when we gain an hour of sleep, we see a 21% reduction in heart attacks. Isn't that incredible? And you see exactly the same profile for example, road traffic accidents on our streets, even suicide rates. But here, as a deeper dive, I want to focus on this, sleep loss and your immune system. And here I want to introduce these delightful blue elements in the image. They are called natural killer cells. Think of natural killer cells like the Secret Service agents of your immune system. They are very good at identifying dangerous, unwanted elements and eliminating them. In fact, what they're doing here is embedding themselves into a malignant, a cancerous tumor mass and destroying it. So what you want is a virile set of these immune assassins at all times. And tragically, that's what you don't have if you're not getting enough sleep. So here in this study, we're not going to deprive you of sleep for an entire night. We're simply going to restrict you to 4 hours of sleep for one single night. And then we're going to look to see what's the percent reduction in immune cell activity that you suffer. And it's not small. It's not 10%, it's not 30%. There was a 70% drop in natural killer cell activity. That is a remarkable state of immune deficiency. And it happens quickly, essentially after one short night of sleep. I think you can perhaps then imagine the state of your immune system after months, if not years, of insufficient sleep. And it's for this reason that we're now finding significant links between short sleep duration and your risk for the development of several different forms of cancer. In fact, that link between a lack of sleep and cancer is now so strong that recently the World Health Organization decided to classify any form of nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen. In other words, jobs that may induce cancer because of a disruption of your sleep-wake rhythms. So you may have heard of that old maxim, you can sleep when you're dead. Well, unfortunately, it is mortally unwise advice. This is what we know from the data, from epidemiological studies across millions of individuals. There's a very simple truth. The shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. Short sleep predicts all-cause mortality. And that's relative to the optimal amount, by the way, that I think it's important to note, which is somewhere between 7 to 9 hours of sleep is necessary for the average human adult. Now, if increasing your risk for the development of Alzheimer's disease or even cancer were not sufficiently disquieting, we've since discovered that a lack of sleep can even erode the very fabric of biological life itself, your DNA genetic code. So here in this study, the scientists took a group again of healthy adults and they limited them to essentially a diet of 6 hours of sleep each night for essentially a week. And then they measured the change in their gene activity profile relative to when those very same subjects were getting a full 8 hours of sleep each and every night. And there were two critical findings. First, the scientists found that there was a sizable and significant 711 genes were distorted in their activity, caused by that 1 week of short sleep. And by the way, this is relevant as a consequence. We know that almost 1 out of every 2 adults in developed nations is trying to survive on 6 hours of sleep or less during the week. The second result was that about half of those genes were actually increased in their activity. The other half were actually decreased in their activity. Now, those genes that were actually switched off by a lack of sleep or insufficient sleep were genes associated with the immune system. So once again, you can see that impaired immunity now expressed at a genetic level. Those genes that were actually increased in their activity, or what we call overexpressed, were genes that were associated with the promotion of tumors, genes that were associated with long-term chronic inflammation within the body, and genes that were associated with stress and, as a consequence, cardiovascular disease. There is simply no aspect of your wellness that can retreat at the sign of sleep deprivation and get away unscathed. It's almost like a broken water pipe in your home. Sleep loss will leak down into every nook and cranny of your physiology, even tampering with the very DNA nucleic alphabet that spells out your daily health narrative. And at this point, you may be thinking, oh my goodness, okay, I get it. I understand. What can I do to start getting better sleep? What are your tips for better sleep? And I really want to sort of take a little bit of time to mention these at the end here, because I think this is a critical component of, I think of this conference. It's a focus on not just your physical health, but also your mental health. This is the key agenda for Thoughtspot. And this is something actionable that I want to leave you with. So first, beyond avoiding the damaging and harmful impact of alcohol and caffeine on your sleep, and if you're struggling with sleep at night, please avoid naps during the day, I have 2 additional main tips for you. The first is regularity. Go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time, no matter whether it's the weekday or the weekend, or even if you've had a bad night of sleep. I know it sounds contradictory. Don't sleep in. Wake up at the same time and then get to bed. The second tip is keep it cool. Your brain and your body need to drop their core temperature by about 1 degree Celsius, or about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit, in order for you to fall asleep and then stay asleep across the night. That's the reason that you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot, because too cold is taking you in the right temperature direction for good sleep. So aim for a bedroom temperature of somewhere around 65 to 68 degrees. Women typically like it a little bit warmer than men, but really it must be that cold. It's fine to wear socks to bed. If you want to bring a hot water bottle to bed, put that for your feet, that's just fine too. But cold it must be for good sleep. The last thing I want to leave you with is a bonus tip, and that is this. If you are struggling to fall asleep, or you've woken up and you're struggling to fall back asleep, and it's been 25 minutes, that's the general rule of thumb, stop trying. Take a break and just give it a rest. Get up and go to a different room, and in dim light, just do something relaxing like reading a book, listen to a podcast. Don't check your phone, don't do anything else on the phone. If you can sort of listen to a podcast without doing that, that's great. And then only return to bed when you're sleepy. And there is no time limit. And the reason is this: if you lie in bed awake for long periods of time, and you do that night after night, your brain starts to learn that this thing called your bed is the place of being awake, not asleep. And therefore, people start to, as they go into the bedroom, they lose their confidence in being able to sleep. Why? Because they've associated the bedroom and the bed with this place of wakefulness, not of sleep. And you need to break that association. So leave the bedroom, only return to bed when you're sleepy. Because the harder you try, it's a little bit like trying to remember someone's name when it comes to sleep. The harder you try, most times, the further you push sleep away from you. So don't worry, even after all that I've told you. Everyone has a bad night. I have bad nights too. Occasionally I struggle with insomnia. A bad night is a bad night. Just get up, get out of bed, know that tomorrow is going to be a little bit of a rough day, and then return to bed only when you're sleepy. And that way you will relearn that association that your bed is the place of sound sleep. And so in finishing then with that last tip and taking a step back, where does this leave us then? What is the blueprint manifesto that I want to offer to you? Well, I think it would be this. Sleep, unfortunately, is not an optional lifestyle luxury. Sleep is a non-negotiable biological necessity. Sleep is your life support system, and it is Mother Nature's best effort yet at immortality. And the decimation of sleep throughout industrialized nations is having a demonstrable effect on both our health, our wellness, our productivity, even the safety and the education of our children. It is a silent sleep loss epidemic, and it is fast becoming one of the greatest public health challenges that we will face in the 21st century. I therefore believe it is now time for us to reclaim our right to a full night of sleep, and without embarrassment or that terrible stigma of laziness. And in doing so, we can be reunited with the most powerful elixir of life, the Swiss Army knife of health, as it were. And with that soapbox rant over, I will simply say good night, good luck, and above all, I do hope you sleep well. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you for your attention and your time, and I'll hand it back over to Dave. Thank you again.